Good evening. I think it's about time for us to go ahead and get started. So as you guys already know, we made mention of this morning, Lonnie's not going to be here tonight or Wednesday. Lord willing, he'll be back on Sunday. But thankfully, they have given me another old ag to carry me through Bible class. So all will be well. So the first two classes we've had together, we've started looking at the life of Christ. There's been one common theme that I think we've hit on quite a bit, and that's the coming of good news. You know, when God, before the 400 years of silence, it seemed like the message a lot of times was, you have failed. And then came those 400 years of silence. And now we're starting to get these revelations of good news over and over again. And I think kind of heading that is these two miraculous pregnancies and births that we've evaluated across Luke chapters 1 and 2. And the first of those being with Elizabeth and Zacharias, that they brought forth a son named John. And what does John's name mean again? Not quite. Yeah, the Lord is gracious, or God is gracious. And in one sense, I think it's saying God is gracious to this couple specifically, because we talked about it being miraculous, the fact that they were advanced in years and that she was barren. But I think it's God is being gracious on a widespread scale, in the sense that John is going to be set aside for special service to the Lord, and that John is going to be that forerunner that kind of points the way that is going to turn the hearts of many of the children of Israel to the Lord, their God. And so that's good news. That's good news for the people. And the second of these being the birth of Jesus. So you have Mary and Joseph. And what is miraculous about Mary's conception? She's a virgin. She has not known a man. This is out of wedlock. But Gabriel is going to come to Mary. And then it says in Matthew, the angel of the Lord is going to come to Joseph and let them know that Mary is conceived with the Holy Spirit, and that this is what they ought to do. And they ought to go through with it, that they're going to bring forth a boy. They're going to call his name Jesus, which means Jehovah saves. Jehovah saves. So when John is born, there is a question that is asked. With all the happenings going on, everything people are noticing, they say, what kind of child will this be? That's the question I have for John. Based off what we've looked at, the last two classes we've had together, the things that said about Jesus, if I were to ask you, what kind of child is this going to be, just based off what we know already about Jesus, what would you say? Some of the things that have been said about him along the way so far. How can we answer that question based off what we know?
Filled with the Holy Spirit. Mm-hmm.
He's going to bring salvation, but he's going to bring like division. I forget how the word it. But for some people, he'll be salvation. For some people, he'll be not.
Yeah. That's right. If we get there, we'll talk a little bit about that tonight.
Are you talking about the young boy that he is right now? He's obedient. Is that what you're talking about?
That could be part of it. I was thinking about things like Gabriel, the angel, says he will be the son of the highest. And he tells Mary he will fulfill kind of the prophecies of 2 Kings 7, that he'll sit on the throne of David and his kingdom will reign forever. Things along that.
So he'll have authority. He'll bring about a new nation, things like that. We're expecting great things.
Yeah, absolutely.
And what's kind of interesting is that up until this point, so we're only a couple classes in, but there's been a lot of buildup. Haven't seen really anything yet, right? I mean, we've seen him born, but he's not done anything yet. And again, if we get to it tonight, I think we'll start seeing him do some things, and maybe take some notes on how he acts. Maybe at what age he does these things too. It'd be interesting to look at.
Very good. And so, kind of where left off last class was you have Mary and Joseph, because of the decree, they're brought there to Bethlehem. They give birth to Jesus. And then he has the humble birth, that he's laid in the manger, and then the shepherds that same night, they get word of it through the angel. They go to Mary and Joseph and let them know about the word they've gotten. And Mary is pondering these things in her heart. And that's kind of where we left off. Is there any comments anyone would like to make before we jump into things tonight? Okay, so I want to look at verses 21 through 24, and I'm going to do a lot of summarizing tonight, but I want to read these real quick.
Luke 2, right?
Yes, Luke 2, verses 21 through 24. And when 8 days were completed for the circumcision of the child, his name was called Jesus, the name given by the angel before he was conceived in the womb. Now when the days of her purification, according to the law of Moses, were completed, they brought him to Jerusalem to present him to the Lord. As it is written in the law of the Lord, every male who opens the womb shall be called holy to the Lord. And to offer a sacrifice according to what is said in the law of the Lord, a pair of turtle doves or 2 young pigeons. And so I think we can notice right away about this is Mary and Joseph and even Jesus in this. I think there's emphasis placed on the fact that they are obeying the law. So verse 22 says the law of Moses. Verse 24, in the law of the Lord. Verse 23, as is written in the law of the Lord. So there's emphasis there that they are doing these things to keep careful consideration to obey God's law. And I want to kind of think about the things they're doing. So the first law they're obeying is the law of circumcision. That goes all the way back to the days of Abraham and is carried over into the Mosaic covenant. And then it talks about the days of purification. So that can be found, does anybody know where that can be found in Leviticus? Leviticus 12. In Leviticus 12. And really all 3 of these things they're doing. Circumcision is mentioned in Leviticus 12. And the days of purification. So back in Leviticus 12, it mentions that when a male child is born, the woman is to take 6 days, or 7 days, a full week, then they're to have him circumcised, and then she's to take 33 more days. So the sum total there was 43 days that she was kind of waiting on this process. And so then the last thing there is they're offering the appropriate sacrifices. After these days of cleansing, after this 40 days is over, then they go to the temple and they offer the appropriate sacrifices for the child. And so I want to go back to Leviticus 12 and read the law that was given about these sacrifices specifically. So Leviticus 12 in verse 6, when the days of her cleansing are fulfilled for a son or for a daughter, she shall bring to the priest at the doorway of the tent of meeting a 1-year-old lamb for a burnt offering and a young pigeon or a turtle dove for a sin offering. Then he shall bring it near before Yahweh and make atonement for her, and she shall be cleansed from the flow of her blood. This is the law for her who bears a child, whether a male or a female. But if she cannot afford a lamb, then she shall take 2 turtle doves or 2 young pigeons, the one for a burnt offering and the other for a sin offering, and the priest shall make atonement for her, and she will be clean. So there was 2 sets of options that they could have done according to the law. The first one is they could have taken a lamb and 1 turtle dove and 1 young pigeon. Or if they could not afford a lamb, they could do doubles. They could do 2 turtle doves and 2 young pigeons. When you go back to Luke 2, what do you notice in verse 24 about the sacrifice Mary and Joseph offered? Absolutely. They do the pair. So we learned something there about their status and their condition, that they're in this moment presenting as a poor family, a family that cannot afford a lamb to sacrifice at this point. I don't know if that's because of the travels they've done recently or if it's just their overall condition, but I think we learned something there about them. And I think you can tie that into the humble birth that Jesus has, that he's laid in the manger. There's not even room in the guest chamber. And the kind of people that he brings in to his birth, that it's the common folk, maybe a profession that was considered lowly in society during those times. And now here he is. He's not born into this well-to-do family that has a lot of stature and worldly power, but instead he's born into a family that's presenting poor. I think maybe we could say about the situation that he's born into a family that doesn't have great earthly status, but they're considering God's laws, and they're making sure to follow the things that God has set for them. And they're people that are faithful to Yahweh. And that's the kind of family the king wants to be born into. And so I think we learned something about his character. And as he fulfills all these promises we may mention of earlier, this is the kind of king he's going to be.
Although maybe not the king they expect. You wouldn't expect this from a king of the Jehovah, of Jehovah. You'd expect maybe something a little bit more grand. And but like you said, I think there are reasons for this. I think the people are picked for a reason, Mary and Joseph.
And one more thing on this section, I'll move quickly after this and give Austin a chance to talk. But it's interesting to me, really striking to me, that Jesus is born into a time where he is subject to the law, when he's quite literally the means by which the law came. He's the very foundation of what the law was built on. And I think, you might ask yourself, why would he subject himself to do so? I think Paul gives us a good answer in Galatians chapter 4. Galatians 4:4-5. But when the fullness of the time came, God sent forth his son, born of a woman, born under the law, so that he might redeem those who were under the law, that we might receive the adoptions as sons. So there you get the idea that he is born under the law. Why? So that he might redeem those who are under the law. that he might enter into this time, faithfully follow the law all the way up until his death. And just like Larson was talking about this morning, he can be that spotless lamb and go forth and be that sacrifice for us so that we can have redemption through him. So the idea there, he was under the law so he could redeem those who were under the law through his actions. Any thoughts on this section? Austin, if you have anything.
I don't think so.
All right. And so in these days, they're going to take Jesus into the temple, and there's going to be a man there named Simeon. What does it say about Simeon's character? Yeah, absolutely. Righteous and devout. And there was a promise that was given to him. What was that promise? Yeah. He wouldn't die until he saw him, the one that was coming. And I like that she said, till she saw him. You know, you're going to know it's him when he comes. And he does. Whenever they walk in, they bring Jesus in there. It seems like he recognizes him instantly. And it kind of reminds me of Elizabeth. When Mary comes in and Jesus is still in the womb and John jumps for joy, she recognizes the Lord is present. And the same thing seems to happen to me, or seems to happen to Simeon here, not me, Simeon, that he recognizes the Lord is present. And I want to read what the things he starts to proclaim. And it also mentions, I think maybe it's worth mentioning, he's filled with the Spirit during this time. 29, Lord, now you are letting your servant depart in peace according to your word. For my eyes have seen your salvation, which you have prepared before the face of all peoples, a light to bring revelation to the Gentiles and the glory of your people, Israel. And so in verse 29, you're letting your servant depart in peace. You fulfilled the promise. This is the Christ. This is the one we're waiting on. He's here. I can know that, and I can die in peace now because you have fulfilled your words. The Lord kept his promise there. I love verse 32. A light to bring revelation to the Gentiles and the glory of your people, Israel. So not just the Jews, but now we get this idea of Simeon proclaiming this is to all people. And maybe he's thinking back to passages like Isaiah 49. So in Isaiah 49, it says, he says, it is too small a thing that you should be my servant to raise up the tribes of Jacob and to cause the preserved ones of Israel to return. I will also give you as a light of the nations so that my salvation may reach to the end of the earth. So back in Isaiah, he's saying, you're my servant, but it's too small of a thing just to kind of raise up the tribes of Jacob. You'll be a light to all the world. And I think that's what Simeon recognizes here, that this is somebody who is going to redeem Israel, but he's going to be a light to everyone, to anyone who is going to look to Jesus and call on him, that he's going to be a light to all the world. Paul, and some of his writing, is going to carry over this idea after Jesus' ascension and everything he does in his life. Acts 26:22, therefore, having obtained help from God to this day, I stand here bearing witness both to small and great, stating nothing, but that when the prophets and Moses said was going to take place, that the Christ was to suffer, and that as first to the resurrection from the dead, he was going to proclaim light to both the Jewish people and to the Gentiles. So this is an idea we see all across the way that God was planning in Isaiah, that Simeon recognizes here, and that the other New Testament writers are going to carry over even after Jesus's ascension, that he's going to be the Redeemer for all people everywhere. You have anything you want to add through that?
You might have said this, and I might have missed it, but I do think it's interesting that you have in Simeon, it mentions he's waiting for this, right? Like he's looking for this, which might be interesting because, I mean, how long have we gone without having any signs that this is going to happen? 400 years. I don't know about you, but I think I'd probably not be as alert as he is. And it seems like he's wanting this to happen. He's alert about it. And I wonder if he's being rewarded for that alertness. And that's why he's kind of put in this situation. That's why a promise is made to him, and he's able to see the fulfillment of that. It's pretty neat. And like we said, you know, his father and mother marveled at this, right? Mary and Joseph look at this like, wow, you know, I can't believe this is happening. I imagine their life is pretty crazy right now. They've had a lot of pretty crazy things happen. It doesn't seem like necessarily it's going to slow down in some ways, but I don't want to get ahead of myself.
Yeah, but I mean, like you made the point last time, Austin. All these promises were a lot of things to take in. Well, here's just even more to take in. Mm-hmm. So, like you said, there's a lot going on. So, verses 29 through 32 continues that idea of good news. That's great news. In verse 34 and 35, we kind of get our first hint of what Amanda was just touching on a minute ago, that for some people, it's going to be good news. For some people, not so good. So verses 34 and 35, Then Simeon blessed them and said to Mary his mother, Behold, this child is destined for the fall and rising of many in Israel, and for a sign which will be spoken against. Yes, a sword will pierce through your own soul also, that the thoughts of many hearts may be revealed. So here we see that Jesus is good news, but also he's going to be responsible for the fall of many in Israel. And the idea there of a sword being pierced through and the rising and falling, maybe at this time some people still had the mindset Jesus was going to be this great earthly king that was able to defeat the nations around them or things like that. And some of the language here makes it sound maybe it is this physical thing happening, that people are being raised up or falling and things like that. But I think the idea here is Jesus' life, his ministry, the things that are going to happen to him, the death, the burial, and the resurrection. This is going to be a great divisive point among the people. And it's how people responded to all these things that happen, that's going to either lead to their rising or their falling. It's going to be the spiritual response they have to it, the acceptance they have of it, the trust and the commitment and the faith they put into it. And it is going to divide people. There's going to be people that follow Jesus and people who don't. And there's going to be a great division there. And then it's not always going to be peaceful between these people. I think that's kind of some of the ideas he's hinting on with the statement he's making, that the last part of that hearts may be revealed. I think that's the essence of what's going on, is how people respond to this.
And Jesus says this later on. He says, I am the way, the truth, the life, right? He realizes he is the splitting point. It's either you obey him or you don't. And he's the gate. All these descriptors, he's the one. And I like what you're saying here is like, we see that at the beginning. They're told this at the beginning. It's like, this will be the child where, you go one way or the other. He'll be the dividing line.
And the rest of that verse, it says, no one comes to the Father except him.
That's right. Yeah, that's great.
And so while this is happening, there is a prophetess there. And I think maybe some translations render the timeline differently. I think the ESV makes it sound like she's 84 years old. Maybe your translations, or the New King James Version at least, says that she was, I think, married for 7 years and then a widow of 84 years. But regardless, this is a woman who has become a fixture in worshiping the Lord in the temple. And she comes over, and I don't know if she received some kind of revelation. It mentions she's a prophetess. But she comes over and starts praising and giving thanks to this child that has been brought into the temple. And I think one interesting point, maybe not the main point here, but what tribe is she from? Asher. Now, in the divided kingdom, did that belong to Israel or Judah? Israel. And so that's interesting to me that we talk a lot about the Babylonian captivity and the return of Judah there, but maybe there was some remnant or some return for the people of Israel. That's just an interesting point that Larson and Colby had done a good job of bringing up last quarter at certain places. But Anna, the prophetess, she, in verse 38, says, and coming in that instant, she gives thanks to the Lord and spoke of him to all those who looked for redemption in Jerusalem. I love that idea, that here she sees the child, and she is anybody who's looking for redemption. She's saying, look, there's this child that is coming, and he can provide redemption. It makes me think about passages in the New Testament, such as ones in Ephesians and Colossians, that there is redemption where? In his blood, the forgiveness of sins. This is the kind of redemption the Savior, this child, is going to bring to our people, to all the world. That he's going to be the light to all the world. He's going to be redemption, and he's going to be Jehovah saves. We can rely on him for redemption through his blood.
It is interesting. It mentions that they're waiting for the redemption of Jerusalem. They're not waiting for the redemption of the whole world necessarily, which makes me wonder, like, what their perception is of what's still going to happen. So you talked about an earthly king earlier. Maybe they're still thinking something along those lines. I don't know. But I do think it's interesting. You may have like 3 camps or so. Like you have a camp that's like, I'm not really waiting at all. A camp that's waiting maybe for an earthly kingdom, and a camp that's waiting for, salvation for the world. And so this is kind of interesting to think about.
But it's continued good news.
Oh, yeah.
Right.
Yeah, that's right. It's good news unless you don't want a king, and some people don't. But is that all you have in Luke 2 for now?
That is it.
Okay. All right. We'll come back hopefully. All right. So we're going to jump over to Matthew chapter 2 now. So Matthew chapter 2. What's the one title we've been giving to Jesus over and over again? Christ. He is king, right? He's king. Well, when you open up in Matthew chapter 2, we're told about another king. Who are we told about in Matthew chapter 2? Herod. All right. Now, Herod, we're going to learn a little bit more about in a second. We're also introduced to some other people here. Who else are we introduced to here? Some wise men, all right? And they're coming from the east, and they come to Jerusalem. Why are they coming to Jerusalem? Because they see a star. Well, I see stars all the time. Well, actually, I live in the city now. I don't see stars nearly as often. But, I mean, stars are not uncommon. So, okay. So, there's something special about the star because of who it's associated with. And by the way, we're talking about people waiting. Does it seem like they've been attentive to this as well? They've been looking for this as well? I don't get the idea that, they just looked up one night and they're like, oh, wow, there's a really crazy star right there. Let's just follow it and see what I think they had this kind of in mind, that they were looking for this. Yes, they want to follow his star. So they come to Jerusalem and they are seeking. And so what's the question they're asking? All right, where is he? Who are they asking? Yes. Oh, I see what you're saying. Yeah, I'm asking who are they directing the question to? Yes, the people in Jerusalem, right? They just want to find who it is. So I imagine this message is spreading pretty far and wide, and I assume, again, they're pretty zealous about this. I'm assuming it's spreading quickly. And like you said, they're looking for the King of the Jews. All right. Who hears this? All right, and who does King Herod think he is? King of the Jews. And so he hears there's word of people looking for the King of the Jews. And I think he also gets the idea they're not looking for him, right? I think he understands that's what's happening here. What does he do? Yes, he wants to research this man, right? Or he doesn't know who it is yet, but he wants to research who this is. And so he's told something. So he talks to his priest and his scribes about where the Christ is to be born. So he wants to know location. What do they tell him? In Bethlehem. So they told him, in Bethlehem of Judea, so this is verse 5, in Bethlehem of Judea, for so it is written by the prophet, and you, O Bethlehem, in the land of Judah, are by no means least among the rulers of Judah, for from you shall come a ruler who will shepherd my people Israel. All right. And so, by the way, that's quoting scripture, right? We've been mentioning this a lot, and we'll mention this even more. I'll probably say this in my invitation on Wednesday night. It is, at least to me, almost distracting how often in our story it says, and this happened to fulfill the word of, and it keeps jumping to those kind of things. And not distracting in a bad way. Don't get that in your mind. But I'm just saying how often that happens is impressive. It's impressive how many prophecies we have being fulfilled and how often they feel the need to mention it. And so we have this happen here. So then what does Herod do as far as his first step is, my council, I want to figure out what they know about this. All right, we think it's in Bethlehem. Then who else does he inquire of? The wise men. All right. Now, what is his question for the wise men? Yes, we know the where. We want to know the when. Okay. Now, in some ways, I'm jumping ahead a little bit here, but I'm just going to go ahead and mention this now in case, I don't think I'll forget to mention it later, but just in case. What time did he apparently get from the wise men?
Maybe a couple years.
Yeah, I think 2 years is about the time he gets from this. Unless later on and this is a weird thing to say, but unless later on he's being very careful, it seems like he's getting the number 2 years from them or somewhere around there. All right. So then what does he tell them? Go find him. Now, that was what they were wanting to do anyway, right? So is it just go find him? Yeah, come back and tell me that I might worship him. All right. Now, does this sound good? Well, on the surface, it sounds good, right? I mean, like the words are good words, right? But like you're saying, it's like the intent is not good. But again, does this line up with what they were wanting to do anyway? Yeah, verse 2. For we saw his star when it rose and have come to worship him, right? So he's feeding right into what they're wanting to do already. And do they seem to agree to this? Yeah. After they listened to the king, they went on their way. So it seems like this is the plan now. Okay, that they're going to go find Jesus and they're going to come back. They're going to worship him and they're going to come back and tell the king where he's at. When they leave, what do they see? They see the star again, right? So the star led them to Jerusalem, and then they ask around, and then they leave King Herod. They see his star again. Well, how do they feel about that? All right, let's go. And so they go start following the star again. And guess where they end up? Where Jesus is at. Now, I do want to point this out. So I don't want to hopefully make too much of this, but I think this is right. What word is used here to describe Jesus in verse 9? Where the child. Sure, because it's referencing Jesus. So they capitalize those things. Yeah, but the child. So, how old was Jesus last time we talked about him? Newborn. Do you get the idea he's a newborn now? No. In fact, this word means young child or little child or something like that. I don't think it's the word for infant or for newborn. I think it's a different word. So some time has passed since the last time we talked about Jesus, right? I'm just going to point that out. And again, I think that plays into that 2-year span. So sometimes I think we might get in our heads that they're showing up as Jesus is still in the manger and everything. Maybe not, right? That might not be the case here. So they go into the house, which I'm assuming they knocked or something, but they go into the house and they see the child with Mary, and what do? Fall down and worship him. Now, again, this is one of those things like if I'm... Go ahead.
Where did they go to?
The house? Yes. Right, because they weren't in the house for the manger. I see what you're saying. Yeah. Good. All right, so they fall down and worship him. So I imagine if I'm Mary, well, if I imagine I'm me, and I have Atlas there, and someone comes in my house, and they fall down and start worshiping Atlas, you wonder how I'm going to feel about that? Kind of weird, right? Like that's not normal. And yet that's what's happening here. So they fall down, they worship this child. And what else do they do? They brought gifts. So they come in, they're honoring this child. We know this is mentioned several times. I'm going to go ahead and mention this here. One thing that's mentioned with specifically Mary is that she stores these things in her heart. She treasures these things in her heart. I imagine this is one of those moments where she looks at this and says, this is different, right? This doesn't normally happen. And yet here it is happening. I imagine she keeps that on her mind. The wise men leave, but what do they not do? They don't go back to Herod. Why not? They're warned. Now, that's actually going to lead to the next part of the story, but what we see is, and we've already seen this to some degree, but we see, I think, another instance of God stepping in and directing people's paths. And so we've seen that a little bit with, hey, Joseph, you need to take Mary as your wife. I don't know if that would have been the decision he was going to make. And I think we see, don't go back to Herod. I don't know if that was the decision they were going to make. I think they might have gone back to Herod. And he's telling them not to do this. And so I think, again, what we're seeing intervention, not to make, I think his plan would have gone through either way, but I think maybe to make his plan easier, possibly. Anything you want to say about that?
I'm good. Well said.
Okay. Yeah, and maybe for their protection. Yeah. Yeah, I don't know what would have happened if they had gone back and told Herod where Jesus was. I don't know if he would let him go or I don't know. But we don't have to worry about it. You want to take the next part? Or?
Yeah, that'd be great.
Okay.
So we kind of know Herod's real intentions. But the wise men, they get this warning, they go back a different way. And the Lord is going to appear to Joseph in a dream. And what's he going to tell Joseph to do? Yeah, get out and go to Egypt for the very same reasons, right, that we were just talking about. And it seems like I'm under the impression that Joseph has a sense of urgency in this, that he arises pretty quickly after this, and they go and depart to Egypt.
And they're doing it by night, right?
Mhm.
So they're obviously wanting to get out of there unseen. Right?
Yeah.
They're doing it stealthily.
And does anybody know how far of a travel it would have been from Bethlehem to Egypt?
Well,
Any guesses?
it depends if you're the rebellious Israelites, and then it's about 40-something years.
yeah. I hope it didn't take them that long. I don't think it did, but roughly 200 miles is what I've been told. On foot, that would be a pretty incredible journey to make, roughly 200 miles. But they make this journey and they get out of there. How long are they supposed to stay in Egypt? Till Herod dies, until the death of Herod. And it says there in verse 15, again, kind of like Austin's point, that you get these helpful interruptions, though, that it might be fulfilled, which is spoken by the Lord through the prophet, saying, out of Egypt I called my son. Does anybody know where that prophecy would have been given at? Hosea 11:1. Hosea 11:1. And when that's given, it's referencing, is it referencing Jesus, or who is it referencing? The children of Israel, right? That's what it's referencing specifically. And so now that you kind of get one of these, what I call double layer prophecies that are fulfilled in the moment about the specific thing, the present thing, but are also pointing forward to Jesus at the same time in a greater way. It's one of those double layer prophecies. And I think, to me, it's the beginning of a lot of parallels you'll see in some of these early accounts of Jesus and the children of Israel. And we'll talk more about that as we go on, especially as we get into the book of Matthew. I think it's structured in a way that captures that. But just like the children of Israel, Jesus is going to be called out of Egypt. That's the first of the parallels, and we'll see more as we go through the text.
I'll just say this too. This is one of those prophecies where there's some prophecies you can look at and be like, yeah, I see that's talking about the Messiah. I get it. I think the Hosea one here, probably in context, not going to get that. Probably need Matthew to supply that for me, because I don't think I'm going to make that connection on my own. And again, the language makes sense, right? I'll call my son. But in Hosea, the idea of son there, he's talking about how he was like a father to Israel and brought them out of the nation of Egypt whenever he brought them out of captivity and taught them to walk and things like that. So he's, is very pointed to Israel. Doesn't seem to be alluding to anything else. But it is interesting how often this happens, where you have something that seems, I guess, on the first read so clear. It's like, well, it's only talking about this. And yet they use it, for the parallel meanings you were talking about.
Yeah, absolutely. And I hate to jump ahead, but some of these parallels, God parting the waters for Israel to walk through, Jesus crossing through the waters in his baptism, Jesus' temptation in the wilderness, Israel's temptation in the wilderness, Moses going up on the mountain, receiving God's word, Jesus going on the mountain, giving God's word. I think you see a lot of parallels there. And Jesus is able to fulfill these things that, and a lot of times, Israel failed at. I think that's one of the things that can be highlighted. So,
It's interesting to me that throughout Israelite history, outside of the original Exodus, Israel was always forbidden to go back to Egypt for any type of, refuge or whatever.
That's right.
But on this occasion, they're instructed to go.
it is interesting. There's something special about this occasion.
Yeah. And I don't know if anything surrounding is just correct. This is really the only safe haven at this point in time for this family, or what. But
Yeah, that's interesting.
I mean, he's told to go there, right? He's specifically told to go to Egypt. So, I mean, I guess that exempts him to some extent. But I also wonder, I don't know. Sometimes I wonder if there are laws that are meant as a nation, saying like, as a nation, you don't go back to Egypt. Where maybe as an individual, that would not be as wrong. But I don't know if that's the case or not. That's speculating.
the land was designed to be a heritage, and they were to take full ownership of that and never withdraw
Mm-hmm.
from that. So, of course, this is a temporal thing.
Right.
We're not going for
That's right.
for a permanent stay.
Well, while they're gone, they leave and go to Egypt. We go back to Herod. What does Herod realize? Yeah, he's been. Someone says he's been tricked. He's been deceived. Either way, whether he thinks he's been tricked or deceived, or he realizes he's not getting his way. And when he realizes he's not getting his way, what does he do? Lashes out, right? Gets very angry, lashes out. And what form does this take? Yes. That's exactly right. All male children, 2 years or young or under. So, and again, it says, according to the time he ascertained from the wise men. So again, that either means the wise men gave him the number 2 years, or maybe something right around 2 years, and he's just maybe being a little bit careful, which is weird to say being careful. We're talking about slaughtering 2-year-olds. But this is a horrible thing. This is a horrific thing. And this is something that, so I was thinking about this earlier this year. So before Atlas's birthday, he just turned 3 this year. So early in the year, I was reading this, and I was thinking, I was like, that'd be both my boys. That'd be both of them. And that's just, that's one of those things, I guess it was a sobering moment to me. It's just, you know, I guess very, very sad to think about what they had to go through. And again, reminiscent, when we're talking about, we've been talking a lot about Egypt right now, reminiscent of what the Israelites had to go through in Egypt, right? The Egyptians were killing male children when they were babies. You have the same thing going on here. And so horrible, horrible act, but we see Jesus is protected from this.
I think it also shows the extreme levels of pride Herod had, that he was so fearful of this happening, he was willing to go to such an extreme measure
That's
to
right.
accomplish that task. And so eventually, Herod is going to die. And then an angel of the Lord is going to appear to Joseph. He's going to say, go back into the land. But Joseph is hesitant about something as he's going back. What is he hesitant about?
The son is reigning. Herod's son is reigning. So he doesn't know if you're safe.
Yeah, absolutely. Herod's son, Archelaus, I hope I'm saying that right. He's reigning over Judea. So they're worried about that. But then they are warned in a dream by God that they should turn aside, not go back to Bethlehem, but where should they go? To Nazareth. To Nazareth. So they're going to go back to that small village area in Galilee that we started. They originally were, Mary and Joseph, when we were first introduced them, that they're going to tuck away in Nazareth. Now, me and Austin have talked a lot about verse 23, the very end of that, and things that might be going on there. And he came and dwelt in a city called Nazareth, that it might be fulfilled which was spoken by the prophets. He shall be called a Nazarene. So is anybody, where's that found in the Bible, I guess is the question I can start with.
Just solid case.
To my knowledge, I don't believe it is a prophecy recorded in the scripture. So I guess that was kind of a mean trick question I gave you guys. I apologize for that. Don't ask me any hard questions for that.
And you mean like word for word?
Yeah, word for word.
Yeah.
There may be things that allude to it. Okay,
Yeah,
so
talking
that might
about
be a thing about
Samson.
the Nazarite vow. Okay,
Yeah.
that might,
So Nazarene just means from Nazareth, right?
from what I understand.
In this context, yes.
And so one thing I've heard, and I'm not saying that I am saying this is exactly what it is, but in John 1, and we'll look at this in a few evenings, but John 1, Philip and Nathanael are having a conversation, and in verse 45, Philip says to Nathanael, "We have found him of whom Moses in the law and also the prophets wrote, Jesus of Nazareth, the son of Joseph." In verse 46, Nathanael says, "Can any good thing come out of Nazareth?" And so maybe there's the idea there that Nazareth is not regarded very highly, that it's looked down upon, and it's something considered lowly, and that might be how some people look at Jesus' birth and his rise to kingship, that they may have that same attitude towards him, that he didn't come with this grandeur and amazing spectacle that he was introduced in the world as far as a lowly birth. So that might be one explanation. Austin has a few more.
We'll just go along that really quick. We talked about Isaiah 53 in the lesson this morning. He will be despised, right? Coming from Nazareth seems like Nazareth is despised. And so that might just go along with what you're saying there. And you were wanting me to give the other couple options there?
That'd be great. I knew you had a few.
So, yeah, there were two other things I saw people mention. And again, I don't know how much stock to put in this, but I'll just mention it. So one thing they said was that Nazareth sounds like in Hebrew the word for branch. So maybe there's a connection with Jesus several times being called the shoot of Jesse, the idea of that being a branch, right? And so maybe there's a reference there saying that he's coming from Nazareth, the idea he's a branch there. I don't know if there's anything to that, but they made that connection. I thought it was interesting. And then the final one, and I don't know again about this either, but it might just be a prophecy. It's not recorded in the scripture that we have. So it might be a prophecy they were aware of, but it just didn't make it into the text that we have for us today. So those are basically the options there.
So if you guys find anything else, let us know.
Yeah.
It'd be interesting. Is that all you got, Matthew?
Yeah.
All right. So now if you'll return to Luke 2, we're going to be in verse 41. We'll do some summarizing here. We have about 5 minutes left. So we already looked at Mary and Joseph. They're careful to keep the law and to be faithful to Yahweh. In verse 41, it says that they return every year for the Feast of Passover. And in verse 42, we see how old Jesus is one specific year. The story about to read, how old is Jesus in it? 12 years old. And so like Austin was mentioning, it's interesting we get these time gaps, these jumps in time. So you go from a baby to 2 years old, give or take, the child, and then now we have him 12 years old. I think you were mentioning we really won't see anything else until he's a grown adult in the future. So it's interesting we get those gaps. But he's 12 years old, and they are going to go for the Passover, and they're going to head back to Nazareth, where they're from. And what are they missing? They're missing something. They're missing Jesus.
Seems a little important, right?
Yeah. And so it's a 2 days journey, I believe it says. They have to go back. And it was kind of the
Which, by the way, they've been gone for 2 days. I'm sorry. I'm getting ahead.
No.
You go ahead.
You sure?
Yeah.
Okay. I was just going to mention that, how you might ask, how could you lose your child? But I think it was custom. They traveled in these giant caravans. So maybe they thought he was with the other children and things like that. But they lose him and they head back. And then they search for him for 3 days. Relatives looking all over the place. Where do they find him at? In the temple. And when they find him, what is he doing? Yeah, he's listening and he's asking questions when they find him. And verse 46 and 47, now so it was that after 3 days they found him in the temple, sitting in the midst of the teachers, both listening to them and asking them questions. And all who heard him were astonished at his understanding and answers. So these are people who are well studied and trained in the law, and they're astonished by what this 12-year-old child knows. And I like to think of it as, here comes this little kid wandering the temple, and you might think like, what are you doing lost there? And he starts asking these heavy questions, and you start to become impressed and figure out there's some wisdom here, and that's pretty significant. Verse 48 kind of tells us that Mary and Joseph were
Frazzled
by it. That's a great word to use.
Which they should be, because they've been 5 days without Jesus, and they're probably thinking it's like, okay, this is supposed to be the light to the nations, and where is he at?
Yeah.
And so when they find him, they're like, it's kind of interesting how accusatory it is. Why have you treated us so? And so, it's like, what have you done to us? Where have you been?
Yeah, there's a lot of pressure on them, and it would have been great. So verse 49 of 50, and he said to them, Jesus, why do you seek me? Did you not know that I must be about my Father's business? But they did not understand the statement which he spoke to them. You have the ESV.
Mm-hmm.
Why don't you go ahead and read the ESV version of that?
Yeah, so it said, did you not know that I must be in my Father's house?
Be in my Father's house. And so this might not be a statement that they understood clearly in the moment. But that word there.
They definitely didn't.
Yeah.
Because it says that they did not understand the saying.
Right.
Yeah. Right after that.
It does not seem to be. Apparently it is. That word must there. Did you not know that I must be about my Father's business? That means it was necessary. It was necessary for him to be there. It's the same word used in Luke 4 when Jesus says, I must proclaim the good news of the kingdom of God to the other cities also, for I was sent for this purpose. This seemed to be him stating that this is where I need to be. This is my purpose. This is what I must be doing. I must be either going about my Father's business or that I must be in my Father's house. And it's interesting that Mary says, Son, why have you done this to us? Look, your father and I have sought you anxiously. Me and your earthly father have sought you anxiously. And Jesus is saying, well, I must have been in my true Father's house, Yahweh's house, taking care of the things that I ought to be doing. Do you have anything you want to add to that?
Yeah, just real quick. So I think the question they're asking is like, how could you have done this to us? Why aren't you worried about us? Focus is on us. And he says, well, I'll tell you where my focus is at. it's on my Father's work, right? Whether it's my Father's business or my Father's house, like my focus is on the Father. And then one thing that we see with this is that we know, like we said earlier, Jesus is supposed to be this dividing line, right? And yet, what does it say there in verse 52? Yes, that's right. So he's increasing in wisdom and stature. We've seen some of that, right? He's growing up. He's getting wise. He's asking questions. But then he's gaining favor with God and man. Now, is that going to continue? Only half of it, right? Half of it will continue. But for now, even though he's supposed to be this division line, we see that people are drawn to him, drawn to what he's like and what he offers. So it's impressive.
Do you think that they really don't understand? I mean, they know that there's something special about Jesus, but they really don't understand that he's going to be the Messiah, right? And they really don't understand. Do you think they do?
Yeah, I don't think they know exactly what that means. I don't know if they know exactly how complete he is as far as being God.
Mary, there's a couple, when she was told that she was gonna have a baby and then year to conceive, she pondered on the things. So they're hearing the things and they're thinking about,
Mhm.
They're pondering it.
Mhm.
They're not ignoring it, they're just trying to figure it out.
I like that. They're trying to figure it out. I think they're considering it and
Yes.
waiting almost.
Yeah.
All right, good deal. Next time we'll pick up looking at John's ministry, I believe, Matthew 3, Luke 3, and Mark 1. Thank you, guys.
Thanks for watching. If you found this video to be beneficial, please follow us on Facebook or subscribe to our YouTube channel. Feel free to share it with others that you feel like may benefit from it. If you need to contact us, please contact us via email at quinn.church@yahoo.com. Also, if you're in the area, we would love for you to come visit with us at one of our assemblies. Have a good day.